Hello, everyone. Good morning and happy Friday. Welcome to our 9th webinar, which, by the way, is our last event in the second series of webinars co-hosted by the Department of Buildings and ASHRAE New York City. Today's webinar will focus on navigating the Local Law 97 reporting portal for combined reporting. It will last approximately 1 hour, and the video recording will be available for future viewing on both ASHRAE and DOB websites. You can access all previous video recordings and presentations by going to ashraeny.org and clicking on Events, and then DOB Sustainability Series. And in a moment, we will share the link in the chat. As for today's presentations, I see that we already have the handouts presentation uploaded to the GoToWebinar. So depending on your device, it should be located most likely at the bottom of your webinar window. And you will be also able to download it from both our websites. Just a few more housekeeping items for today's event. Everyone except for the speakers is in listening mode only. However, we would like to encourage everyone to ask questions in the chat. And again, it may appear as chat or questions depending on your device. So please take a second and locate your control panel and then your chat or questions field where you can answer all questions. And as always, we have a very strong DOB team with us today, so they will be answering your questions during the webinar. And additionally, if time permits, we may be able to conduct a brief Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So again, this is our last webinar in the second series. And in addition to the videos and slides, the presentation slides, we will also post the FAQ to both ASHRAE and DOB websites. Additionally, you have a possibility of asking follow-up questions. You can email your questions directly to the email address that will be posted in the chat in a second, and it's beam_ll97@buildings.nyc.gov. So again, it's beam_ll97@buildings.nyc.gov. And finally, please let me introduce our speakers. I'd like to welcome Emily Hoffman, Lydia Shapiro, and Thomas Carpenito. All are with the Department of Buildings. And additionally, we have today Sydney Abraham with Clearly Energy. So again, welcome everyone. And let me pass it over to the next.
All right, thank you, Luke. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, ASHRAE, for hosting this series that we've been doing. You know, like Luke said, I'll be starting us off along with my colleagues, Lydia Shapiro and Thomas Carpenito, and we'll also have Sydney Abraham to walk us through some of the BEAM platform for combined reporting. I don't think Luke mentioned this will not be a 2-hour presentation. This is a 1-hour presentation. If time permits at the end, we will have some time for Q&A, and we shall proceed. Next slide, please. So as always, starting off these presentations, we want to start with the Local Law 97 reporting timeline. The deadline for Local Law 97 reports is May 1st. The BEAM portal opened earlier this month. Along with the May 1st deadline, there is an automatic grace period that you do not have to apply for that extends the deadline to June 30th for all Local Law 97 reports and 88 reports. During that grace period prior to June 30th, you are allowed to apply for a Local Law 97 report extension, which would grant you the deadline to August 29th. If you are granted that deadline, you would also be able to submit your 88 report then. So this is effectively 6-month timeline to get those 97 and 88 reports in. The benchmarking deadline is still May 1st. Next slide, please. We also want to just, we've been going over this every presentation about the local law 97 reporting process. It does involve 3 different reporting systems, so it's important to follow the steps in order to view your information in BEAM. The first step is to go into DOB Now and pay your filing fee. When you are paying your filing fee, you are also entering important contact information, including 3 email addresses that will be the only email addresses that can access this building or group of buildings that you are paying for in the BEAM system. We need contact information for the owner and the owner's rep, if applicable, and the service provider. If the owner's rep is the service provider, you do not need to add contact information twice. Just enter that information as either the owner's rep or the service provider. And again, those email addresses will be the only ones to view that building that you're paying for in the BEAM platform. The next step, you need to go to Energy Star Portfolio Manager and share your property information with New York City's account. Once you do this, this data will transfer nightly into BEAM. Just note that this is a different process from benchmarking than in prior years. If you haven't listened to our other webinars, we encourage you to watch the benchmarking forum, look at the benchmarking forum slides, watch that webinar for specific details on how to do this property share. Once you do this, you will have access into the BEAM platform for the building that you paid for, and you will be able to see the information that you populated in ESPM transfer into the BEAM platform. Once you are in BEAM, you review your information and submit your reports through a ticketing system. Once you submit your report, it will come to DOB and the staff will review it. There is an auditing process. All communications will happen in the BEAM platform. Next slide, please. So today, we're going to talk about combined reporting and aggregate emissions. So first, we want to talk about what is a combined report. This is when multiple buildings are submitted together with a single filing fee and a registered design professional attestation. So this can happen during the first compliance period only. So that's, calendar years 2024 to 2029. And it's only eligible if you meet 3 criteria. So you can file for a combined report when when buildings have the same owner, are on the same lot or adjacent lots, and follow the same local law 97 pathway. If you're filing combined report, you're paying only a single filing fee, but you still must show separate calculations for each building's emission and emission limit. There is a caveat there. If the buildings share energy service, they can submit an aggregated report. So we'll talk next slide about what an aggregated report is. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is an aggregated report? This is when multiple buildings combine their emission limits into one total limit, and when multiple buildings can combine their annual emissions into one total emissions value. How is compliance assessed on an aggregate report? Compliance is assessed at the aggregate level. So aggregate level in ESPM would be that parent property. So an aggregate report is compliant when the total aggregate annual emissions is less than or equal to the total aggregate emissions limit. An aggregate report is not compliant when the total aggregate annual emissions is greater than the total aggregate emissions limit, which makes sense. But note that if it is not compliant, if an aggregate report is not compliant, and any penalties that are issued are at the bin level, so at the individual building level. Next slide, please. There are certain requirements for aggregated reporting. In DOB Now, when you do your payment, you have to identify the exact BBLs and bins that will be in that combined report. That's how we'll know which buildings are filing together or filing either combined or aggregated report. In ESPM, you're required to list all BBLs and bins at the parent property level. So that would be the same BBLs and bins that you're paying for in DOB now. Then you're listing each bin as an individual child property. Note that the energy emissions will be at the parent property level. That will be the energy that's pulled into BEAM. And then for each child, it's important to specify under each child, it's required to specify under each child the gross floor area and the associated property types. That way a limit can be established for each child property. BEAM will bring that information in from ESPM, and compliance can be assessed at the aggregate level. BEAM will automatically apportion the energy on the bin level based on the weighted average of the emission limit. So once that happens, the RDP can look at this, this automatic proration and have options. They can either refine the property type breakdown for more detailed emission limits, or they can redistribute the emissions per bin using block proration. We'll cover all of these in detail. And if there is a more complicated scenario where more accurate bin needs to be assessed per building, more accurate emissions per building than using the block proration or this automatic calculation, then please contact DOB for assistance. And then one last thing is that you can apply any deductions or alternative methodologies either at the aggregate level or the bin level. You can never do both in one report. So you're either applying all of the deductions and alternatives at the aggregate level or at the building level, but not both. Next slide, please. All right, so this is basically what I just covered. So this is just in more detail. So the RDP has to apportion the emissions by bin. When the BBL and multiple bin is imported into BEAM, there's an auto proration that happens in BEAM based on the weighted average of the limits. If that auto proration is not accurate for this particular aggregate reporting, then you use ticket 7 to manually adjust the emissions per bin. And then again, for further precision or for very complex campuses, you need to contact DOB and we'll assign you a case manager for any assistance. If your emission limit or your GFA breakdown requires further refinement, you'll go to ticket number 4, the building emissions limit, to provide more granular property types and GFA breakdown. And in this case, you'll have to submit the ticket per bin. Again, there's 2 ways to apply deductions. You have to pick one. You can't use both approaches. You either apply deductions on the aggregate level. This would be our campus deduction ticket, number 6A, or on the building level using ticket number 6. Next slide, please. All right, and I'll pass it off to Thomas to talk about the DOB now filing fees for combined reports.
Sure, thank you, Emily. For the DOB now filing fees, like I said, broken up between Article 320 and Article 321. For Article 320, since we're doing a combined report, we're going to be dealing with the complex fee, and that's $615. If you do a single bin and a single BBL, and you're not doing a combined report, that fee is going to be $210. But since we're doing the combined, it automatically will trigger the complex fee. Now that complex fee includes any deductions and alterations that you add when doing your combined report. And that $615 is flat if you don't add any of the additional options below. So if you add a penalty mitigation or an adjustment or an extension request, all these fees below will be added to that $615 complex fee. Also just flagging, if you're doing a non-combined report and you add any deductions on alternatives, that will automatically trigger that $615 as well. Right, so for Article 321, it is a little bit different. So it will be $210 flat, regardless of if you add any deductions on our alternatives, or if you're doing a combined report or a single report. So it's always going to be $210. But if you add any of the additions below, it will add that to the $210 flat fee at the beginning. So just repeating some of the stuff we repeat on most of the webinars, that when you do your DOB Now filing fee, you have to add 3 distinct email addresses into there: the owner, owner's rep, and the service provider. You don't have to add service provider if the owner's rep and service provider are the same. But when you do include those 3 email addresses into your DOB Now filing fee, it gives you access when you create your account in Beam to your CBL and also your ESBM data in Beam. So it's very pertinent. Those email addresses, and as well the payment information, so your payment confirmation number, are uploaded to Beam on a nightly basis. So it's not possible to submit that Beam report and also do your filing fee in one day. So give yourself plenty of time. So we're going to assume that you did already create your account in your DOB Now, but if you didn't, you could use the DOB Now user guide right here and create that NYC account or NYC ID account and include all your information. Once you do create that account and you log in, you'll be greeted with the main page here. So you'll select DOB Now Safety, go to Energy, and you'll select Local Law 97 and 88 filing fee payments. You go over to Local Law 97 Payment, and you'll be greeted with the Stakeholder section. This is what we talked about before, where you have to input those 3 email addresses. Whether you select owner or owner's rep as the person who's doing the filing fee and who has the NYC account that's submitting the filing fee, that information on the bottom that's grayed out will auto-populate based on what you inputted when you created that NYC ID account. So if it's not correct, you'll have to go in to your NYC ID account and change some of that information. You're not able to change that in the filing fee. You see right there as well, you can input the service provider. So the owner's type is another section here on the stakeholders tab that allows you to select, obviously, your owner type. What is important about this is if you are fee exempt, you must select the owner type applicable for you. And when you get to the bottom of your filing fee, instead of proceed to pay, where you will input your information, it will just have the option just to submit at the end. Next question you'll be asked is whether you're doing an Article 320 or an Article 321 report. So you'll select yes, I'm doing a compliance report, and you'll select 2024. Like I said before, you could select additional options that will incur an additional fee, like in the previous slides before, based on Article 320 or Article 321. If you're doing Article 320, now remember that we already have triggered the complex fee. So you're doing a combined report, so you are able to add any of these alternatives or deductions for calculating your emissions here and not incur an additional fee. So that's only for Article 320 and the DOB Now filing process. Next step for both, regardless of what article, is going to be selecting your bins and BBLs that are associated with your combined report. So you'll go and select your borough, block, and lot, click search and add. And from there, you could select any bins that are applicable to your report. And you'll go on the bottom and press select and add. So you go borough, block, and lot again. If you want to add an additional BBL to your combined report, you'll do that there in the very same process. Once you do add your BBLs or your multiple bins, it'll populate here at the bottom of your filing fee. So if you added any that don't appear here, you'll have to add them again. So right here, I have an example with 2 BBLs and 3 bins. and I will select yes. The bins are associated with a single owner, or the property is a co-op or condo, and I could add any related payment confirmation numbers from before. I'll go proceed to pay. And right here again, if you're doing a complex or a combined report for Article 320, the base fee is going to be $615. If you're doing it for Article 321, base fee will be $210. And that's based on if you do any additional fees or not. You go to the pay now. We also have a DOB now payments manual up here that you could click, and you'll be rewarded with your payment confirmation number. Now this is an important number that is transferred to Beam, like I said, on that nightly basis. So you're unable to submit your Beam report without this number, and you have to wait for that nightly transfer. I'll hand it over to Lydia Shapiro.
Thank you, Thomas. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending our combined reporting webinar. So we're gonna, we already spoke a lot about combined reporting. We're gonna go into the deeper details, and we're gonna start with the ESPM, Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Next slide, please. There are a couple of changes that are made this year due to Local 97 requirement. There are two ways you can create a report in the ESPM. One is a standalone property. So standalone property reporting is only allowed for single building. So that is one BBL, one bin. Any other configurations, single BBL with multiple bins or multiple BBLs with multiple bins, should be reported as in ESPM as a campus. Next slide. How do you set up a campus? So we already know, all of you are done benchmarking before, you know that the campus comprises of the parent property and the child properties. So for Local 97 reporting, each child property should be representing one bin, one building on the campus. And it could be one BBL, multiple bins, or multiple or adjacent BBLs with multiple bins. It is still one one campus, and each bin should be created as a campus where you enter the square footage for that building and the property type. Choose a proper property type as per ASPM classification. We have a couple of examples here. First example is one BBL, one multiple bins. You see there's one BBL, there are two buildings on that property. Each building is represented as a separate child property. On the parent level, we have the BBL, both bins, so we know that all the information is aggregated on the parent level. You also need to make sure energy usage, GFA, number of buildings, all the important information is aggregated on the parent level. So you will get accurate emissions limit calculations and then aggregate emissions as well. The second example is multiple BBLs with multiple bins. So in this case, we have two separate BBLs that report together. There's one bin on one lot, and there are two bins on the other lot. You see that we have three child property, one per each bin. And on the parent level, we list two BBLs and all three bins. Before we move on to how this information should be reported in step-by-step guidance, Sydney from Clearly will show you how you will see that information in Beam.
All right, thanks so much, Lydia, appreciate it. So like Lydia said, I'm gonna walk you through what that information looks like when it comes into Beam. So a little bit about how bin level submissions and BBL level submissions differ from one another and how you can see things like the emissions limit for both types of reports. So next slide, please. Thank you. So as you can see here on this screenshot, we are looking at the Beam inventory. So you can see from the arrow here, we are clicked into the inventory already. I'll just pause and make a note that if you have not yet logged into Beam, or if you're not familiar with the interface, I would definitely recommend going back and watching one of the previous webinars where we've walked through that, or referring to the guidance. I'm not going to go super in depth right now into how to navigate the inventory, but just quickly at a high level, you'll just note that the inventory view on Beam is where you can see all of your individual building or submission level records. And that includes information that has come from ESPM or DOB Now, or information from the original covered buildings list provided by DOB. So in this screenshot, I'm clicked into the inventory, and you can see from that highlighted circle that I'm clicked into a view called View by Property. So this is the default view. So when you click into the inventory, this is where you will automatically end up. But there is a second option right next to it called View by Tax Lot. So what we mean by these are really synonymous with BBL and bin level submissions. So in this case, View by Property means viewing the bin level records, and View by Tax Lot means viewing the BBL or the aggregate level submissions. So I'm going to start on the property view, which is, if you've already logged into Beam, probably what you're more familiar with seeing. So here on this property side, again, I'm seeing everything as an individual bin record. So to show you, to orient us a little bit into what I'm seeing right now, you can see that I have two separate rows with my two separate bins. These bins each, you can see them in the bin column. They're two different from each other, but they both share a BBL. So these are two bins on the same lot. A little bit over to the right, you can see, for example, the address column. These are just sample buildings, right? So it's 123 Test Street. But you can see that there's two different addresses for my two different bins. Next slide, please. Thank you. So still on that View by Property tab, if you scroll through this view, you can see some of the other information associated with these bins. So in this particular screenshot, you're seeing things like my calculated emissions limits for each of these bins individually. Things like the maximum allowable offsets for each of these bins, and then the actual emissions as well as the excess emissions. So in other words, the overage, right? How far over these bins are from their actual limit. In this case, again, these are just sample buildings, but in this case, these bins are both under their limit, which is great. But you can also keep scrolling around. So obviously this is a screenshot, but if I were to log into Beam, you can scroll through and see lots of other information associated with each of these bins individually. A lot of that is the underlying information that gets us to these things, like the limits and the emissions. So things like electricity consumption or natural gas consumption, or gross floor area, or the DOB Now filing fees. So all of that information can be viewed here in this View by Property tab at the bin level. And next slide, please. Thanks. So now from my highlighted circles here, you can see that I've switched over to the View by Tax Lot tab. So a lot of this is pretty similar in terms of formatting and setup, but you can see now that the order of these bins and BBLs has been reversed. So instead of having an individual row for each of my bins, I have one row because it's all in the BBL level or the aggregate level. And then I have my list of bins, so those two bins on the BBL in a comma separated list. Similarly, you can see that same address line 1 column, which again has those two addresses on my BBL in a comma separated list. And you can also see a little bit over to the left, there's these little plus buttons that are highlighted. And if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. You can see that if you click on those little plus buttons, you can expand this view and actually now see all of the individual bin information that makes up this aggregate report. So stepping back a little bit, right, when you put information into ESPM in an aggregate way, it comes into Beam and it'll create this aggregate level report, so at the BBL level. But if you go in to expand this view, you'll be able to see how Beam prorates that information down to the bin level. However, if you're submitting a combined report or an aggregate report, all of that really is only relevant at that combined level, so you don't really need to get as much into the weeds of the prorated bin level information. And the other thing here is that you can see the bin column is highlighted, right? So now you can see how each individual bin makes its own row. And from that information, you'll be able to see the same data that we saw from the View by Property tab. And next slide, please. All right, so just another screenshot, right? Similar, similar views here, similar to the View by Property tab. I can also from the similar to the View by Property side, on the tax lot side, I can see the same kind of information. So, the final emissions limit for my entire BBL, my entire aggregate report. I can see the actual emissions for, this submission, and I can see the excess emissions. So in this case, again, just an example, my BBL is over the emissions limit. So in this case, I might want to do something like either one, report at the, the bin level so that I'm, under my limit, or the other option is that I could try to take a deduction at the campus level or at the aggregate level. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I know Lydia is going to talk a little bit more about the logistics of taking a deduction. But if you are going to apply for a deduction, you can choose to do that either at the aggregate or the BBL level or at the bin level. You can't do both, but if you are to take a deduction at the aggregate level, this is how you'll be able to see it. So in this example, I have taken 2 deductions for this BBL. So I have an on-site storage deduction and a solar deduction, which are applying to my emissions and decreasing those emissions for my entire aggregate report. Like I said, you can also choose to do this at the bin level if you have individual bins that are maybe over the limit and you want to start to bring those down, but you have to choose one or the other. You cannot do both. So with that, I will turn it over to Lydia again to talk through the logistics of that.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Sydney. So how do you submit the combined reporting? Emily went on a high level details on how do combined reporting work. There are a few different options. So there's aggregate reporting, where all buildings report together. Sydney just showed you an example how that works. You have one BBL with multiple bins or multiple adjacent BBLs with multiple bins. All the limit is calculated on the aggregate level, and the emissions are calculated on the aggregate level. So the entire property is assessed on the aggregate level. There is also mixed reporting, where you have some buildings that aggregate, some buildings that are separately metered or exempt. The scenario could be the same, one BBL with multiple bins or multiple adjacent BBLs with multiple bins. In these cases, there is an option for you to remove one or more bins from aggregate emissions and still submit aggregate report for the remaining bins. But if you have a very complex scenario, we strongly advise you to contact the Department of Buildings and we assign a case manager to work with you on your particular property. Next slide. Here's one of the possible layouts of how complex the campus could be. So we have 3 lots here, which is 3 BBLs. One lot has 3 buildings, one of them Article 320, the other 2 Article 321. In the middle, we have only 1 building, but it might have shared energy systems with the other 2 BBLs. And on the next lot, we have 3 different buildings. One is the city buildings, one Article 320, but it's a delayed compliance pathway, and one Article 320 that shares energy with other BBLs. So if you have this kind of scenario, we advise you to contact the Department of Finance. But in this particular example, it shows that portion highlighted in blue, 3 buildings that follow the same 2024 Article 320 pathway can submit one aggregate report. Next slide. As Emily and Thomas mentioned, you can submit payment for aggregate report for Article 321. So now we're going to talk about Article 321 prescriptive pathway. Let's say you have multiple bins or on a single BBL or adjacent BBLs. Your compliance will be assessed at the bin level. because you follow PSM Article 321 submission pathway. You can file just one file in fee, which is going to be $210 for combined filing. And next portion is how does it work with the portfolio manager account and benchmarking? We have a lot of those questions. If you file Article 321 PSM report, it does not require to share the properties, ASPM properties shared with the BIM. You can file Article 321 PSM report in BIM without benchmarking or ESPM information. However, you will still have to do that if this property is also subject for Local Law 84. So you paid for the multiple buildings on the aggregate level in DOB now. How do you submit that report in BIM? Because you submit Article 321 PSM report, you have to actually submit a separate ticket, which is ticket number 5, for each building. You can use the same DOB now payment confirmation number for each of those reports. You also need to submit separate PCM template and attestation for each building. So if you have 2 buildings on the same BBL that follow Article 321 PCM, you can pay one fee, but you do need to submit 2 separate reports in BIM and provide 2 separate PCM templates and attestations. Next slide. Here's an example. You can have a very complex campus setting, but you're still able to submit aggregate payment for 2 Article 321 building. Same principle applies for Article 321 performance pathway, which is 2030 limits. Next slide. Now we're gonna go over step-by-step process. Where do you start? You start with the portfolio manager account. You create the property, the campus property. You aggregate all the energy on the parent level, and you share that property with the that campus with the New York City. Keep in mind, if you are sharing the campus, you need to share the entire campus. Which means the parent and all child properties associated with that campus. Once BIM receives your report, it will assess auto proration of emissions by BIM. So BBL parent level energy emissions will be automatically apportioned based on the weighted emissions limits per bin. Bin level emissions will be calculated by multiplying square footage by the property type emissions factor. Next step, if you submitted the benchmarking report, but you actually need to break square footage further down in BIM for Local Law 97 compliance, you can submit ticket number 4, where you can refine bill level emissions limit by providing more detailed square footage and property type information. If you wish to do so for Article 321 2030 limits reporting, you need to submit ticket number 5 to break down the square footage on a more granular level. Emissions will be apportioned based on the updated limits. Next slide. Once you recalculated the emissions and limits on your property, you need to review bin level emissions and adjustments. RDP reviews that operation of bin level emissions. And if there are no more additional changes needed, you proceed to step number 6. So remember we talked about how the emissions are going to be, so the limits are going to be calculated on the bin level. Emissions are going to be calculated on the parent level and then prorated based on the limits to the bin level. So if you would like to change that proration and assign it based on the energy usage, you can do that by submitting ticket number 7 block proration and assign percentage of energy use to each bin. If you need additional refinement on the energy proration, you can contact Department of Buildings and we will work with you. Now, next step, let's say the building has the deductions or alternative methodologies. As Sydney mentioned, you can apply it on the aggregate level or on the building level, but you cannot do it on both. So if you decided that you're going to apply deductions to one of the building, that means you have to do everything on the building level. Otherwise, you can apply aggregate. Aggregate level deductions, for aggregate level deductions, you need to submit ticket number 6A, aggregate deductions. If you would like to do it on the building level, you need to submit ticket number 6. Keep in mind for fuel cell and or beneficial electrification, the deductions can be only taken on the building level. So for fuel cell and beneficial electrification, it is always ticket number 6. Once you complete those steps, you need to submit the final attestation for aggregate reporting, and that's for both Article 320 and Article 321. Next slide. I mentioned a lot of different tickets, and we're going to walk you through what each of those tickets looks like. So I mentioned ticket number 4. Let's say you submitted, and we actually showed you some of those during our previous webinars. So this is ticket number 4. This is where you break down the square footage for each building if the one that you submitted with the benchmarking report does not accurately represent the building. Keep in mind that you have to reassign the entire square footage for the whole building. You cannot just change one portion of the building that is not accurately reflected. So the whole building has to be reassigned, reassigning the square footage per actual property type. Next slide. I also mentioned that the emissions are calculated on the aggregate level, and then they are reapportioned to the bin level based on the weighted average of the limits per building. But if you would like to prorate it based on the actual usage, then you submit ticket number 7, where you assign percentage to each of energy use to each building. If this ticket does not cover your entire property, then you can contact the Department of Buildings. We will work with you. For all the complex, so just generally, this entire presentation is about general scenarios. Any one-off scenarios with complex reporting should be addressed with DOB, and we will assign a case manager to you. Next slide. So I mentioned there are 2 different methodologies to apply deductions and alternatives. You can do it on the building level, which is shown on the left, ticket number 6, or you can do it on the aggregate level, which is shown on the right, ticket number 6A. Once again, you can only do one or the other. And once again, beneficial electrification and fuel cells can only be applied on the building level. Next slide. Once you addressed all the refinement in your local 97 aggregate submission, you need to submit the ticket number 15, which is attestation of aggregated report. The ticket generally shows you what is the required steps for that attestation, and you need to fill out and upload the form that should be signed and sealed by the building owner and RDP. That concludes my part of the presentation, and I pass the word back to Emily Hoffman. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lydia and Thomas and Sydney for walking us through that. You know, we went through that. Campuses can be complicated, but you know, we really have, you know, designed this process to cover the majority of the campus applications where, you know, in certain, you know, in these situations, so that the building energy usage aligns with the way Con Ed is, you know, sharing on the BBL level, and Beam is automatically prorating this per bin. We know that this may not always be accurate, which is why you have options to adjust that information per building. Again, if you have a unique scenario that was not covered here, you should reach out to us and we will work with you. You know, we are deeply committed into getting, you know, everyone reporting this year and in the right way. So, you know, please note that we have a full staff here that's ready to do that. So, you know, we appreciate you attending these webinars. We are getting bombarded with questions, so please give us some time to respond to these. We will, and continue to reach out to this email address, beam_locali97@buildings.nyc.gov. I do want to conclude here that, again, this is our last webinar. We have gotten, over the course of these webinars, thousands of questions. We are compiling all of those into an FAQ that we will be posting on our website and on the Beam knowledge base. You know, we see a lot of the same repeat questions, so we want to make those upfront and public. So, you know, in the next week or two, we're going to be working on getting that, you know, ready and live. Again, bear with us. There's a lot of questions that are coming, and we are, you know, trying our best to get this out in the most streamlined way possible. And again, I want to reiterate that if you have a complex campus, a very unique situation, you know, like these images that we showed where you have multiple compliance pathways on a lot, please reach out to us. We have case managers that will help. And thank you for attending. We will have in April, we are planning one more webinar. It will be hosted by Urban Green Council, and we'll be talking about offsets and the offset program, how you purchase offsets and things like that. So please be on the lookout for that exact date. It will be in April. Urban Green Council will be hosting, we'll be doing outreach as well. And thank you very much. That concludes our presentation for today.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily, Lydia, Thomas, and Sydney. And also a big thank you to everyone who has been involved with these webinars. And really, it's tens and tens of people. So thank you, everyone, and a virtual round of applause. And next, before we end this webinar, and actually this whole series, I wanted to share a few more announcements. First, about the video recordings from, actually the video recording from today. It will be available in the next few days after the weekend, and it will be added to the previous webinars that are already published on ASHRAE and DOB websites. And what else? Links are in the chat. Contact information for any follow-up questions is on the screen, and we are also sharing a presentation evaluation link in the chat. We would appreciate everyone's feedback. And as always, we will leave the webinar open for another couple minutes so that you can click all the links or save them, the PDF slides and copy email addresses. And that's really all for today. So thank you very much for your support, for attending our webinars, and for your feedback, and especially for being a part of this journey. So thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful weekend.